Good day, mates! Welcome to a journey into the shadows of the unexplained, where the ordinary world we think we know reveals its darker, more mysterious side. Today, we are diving into 6 spine-chilling phenomena that have left witnesses questioning everything they thought they knew about reality. These aren't just campfire stories or urban legends, these are experiences reported by everyday people from all walks of life, encounters with the inexplicable that leave behind a lingering sense of unease long after they've passed. From the terrorizing whispers that call your name when you're home alone to the oripient side of a doll that moves when no one's watching, we'll explore the thin boundary between the world we can explain and the macabre possibilities that lie just beyond our understanding. What makes these phenomena truly disturbing isn't just their supernatural nature, it's how they intrude upon the most familiar and secure aspects of our lives, our homes, our neighborhoods, our daily routines. They create a profound sense of medo by suggesting that the reality we take for granted might be far more permeable, far less certain than we'd like to believe. Whether you're a skeptic searching for rational explanations or someone who's experienced something beyond explanation yourself, I invite you to keep an open mind as we explore these 6 haunting tales that continue to challenge our understanding of what's possible in our world. Perhaps the most unsettling question isn't whether these things happen, but what it means for us if they do. Good day there, mate! Ever had that terrorizing feeling when you're home alone and could have sworn someone called your name? Crikey, it's enough to send shivers down your spine, isn't it? There's something deeply unsettling about hearing a voice when no one else is around, that moment when your ears prick up and your heart starts pounding against your ribcage like it's trying to escape. The human mind is a complex beast, fair dinkum. When we are alone, especially at night, our brains become hyper-aware of our surroundings, picking up on the tiniest sounds that we'd normally ignore during the day. That creaky floorboard? That ticking clock? That whisper of wind against the window? All these sounds suddenly become amplified in the darkness, creating an oripient atmosphere that plays tricks on our senses. There's a reason why so many people report hearing their names called when no one's around. It's a phenomenon that's been documented across cultures for yonks. Our brains are wired to recognize patterns, especially those related to danger or social connection. When we hear something that even vaguely resembles our name, our brain immediately perks up, like a meerkat on watch, ready to respond to potential threats or opportunities. Remember Sarah from Perth? She'd been living alone in her flat for only a fortnight when it started happening. Every night, just as she was drifting off to sleep, she'd hear someone whisper her name clear as day, like someone was standing right next to her bed. The macabre experience left her sleepless for weeks, questioning her own sanity. Was she dreaming? Was it just the pipes? Or was there something more sinister at play? What makes these experiences so universal is how they tap into our primal fears. Since ancient times, humans have gathered around fires, telling stories about the unknown, the unseen, the supernatural. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were warnings, ways of making sense of a world full of dangers we couldn't always see or understand. The voice in the empty room is just a modern version of these age-old fears. The real corker is how these experiences seem to happen to even the most skeptical among us. Take my mate Dave, tough as nails and about as spiritual as a brick. He moved into an old Queenslander in Brisbane and swore blind he kept hearing someone calling him from the empty study down the hall. He'd dash in there, heart racing with medo, only to find nothing but dust motes dancing in the air. Scientists reckon there are heaps of explanations for these phenomena. Sometimes it's as simple as the acoustic properties of a room creating strange echoes. Other times, it's our brain misinterpreting ambient noise, the hum of a fridge, the distant sound of traffic, or even our own blood pulsing through our ears. The brain desperately tries to make meaning from these random sounds, and sometimes, it decides that meaning is our name. What's truly terrorizing is how these experiences can escalate. It might start with hearing your name once or twice, easy to dismiss as imagination gone walkabout. But then it happens again. And again. Soon, you're sleeping with the lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of your home. The psychological toll can be immense, transforming your safe haven into a place of dread. The line between psychological and paranormal explanations is about as clear as mud. Some reckon these voices are manifestations of stress, anxiety, or even undiagnosed conditions like exploding head syndrome. Yeah, that's a real thing, dead set. Others believe they're evidence of something beyond our understanding, echoes from another plane of existence, perhaps, or attempts at communication from those who've passed on. Let me tell you about Mai, who lived in an old apartment building in Sydney's inner west. She started hearing a woman's voice calling her name every night at exactly 3:17 a.m. The irreverent precision of the timing was what spooked her most. She started recording while she slept and sure enough, captured a faint whisper that couldn't be explained by any normal sounds in her flat. The recordings gave everyone who listened goosebumps. Cultural beliefs play a massive role in how we interpret these experiences. In some Indigenous Australian traditions, hearing your name called by an unseen voice might be interpreted as a message from ancestors or spirits of the land. In Western traditions, it might be seen as a ghost or poltergeist. Either way, the macabre experience transcends cultural boundaries, and so does the fear it inspires. The psychological concept of pareidolia helps explain why we are so good at finding patterns in randomness. Just as we see faces in clouds or the man in the moon, our ears can hear words in random noise. This tendency is amplified when we are anxious, tired, or alone, creating the perfect storm for auditory hallucinations that feel as real as you and me. Consider this, and what if these voices aren't hallucinations at all? What if, in moments of quiet solitude, we become more attuned to frequencies or dimensions that normally escape our notice? The supernatural possibility that our homes might be bustling with activity we simply can't perceive most of the time is enough to make anyone's skin crawl. Are we ever truly alone? The most confronting cases are those where multiple people hear the same voice. In a sharehouse in Newcastle, 3 roommates all reported hearing a child's voice calling their names at different times. None of them had mentioned it to the others, thinking they were just being silly dills, until one night when they all heard it simultaneously. The medo they felt in that moment was something none of them would ever forget. Technology has changed how we experience and document these phenomena. These days, everyone's got a smartphone with a recording app. People are capturing EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, in their homes, sometimes revealing voices that weren't audible to the human ear at the time. Whether these are genuine paranormal events or just technical glitches remains a hot topic of debate among both skeptics and believers. The most terrorizing aspect might be how these experiences follow a pattern across cases. Often, the voices start soft and infrequent, gradually becoming clearer and more insistent. Many report that the voice initially sounds like someone they know, a parent, partner, or friend, only to shift into something unfamiliar and increasingly threatening over time. It's as if whatever is calling knows exactly how to lure you in. Sleep experts reckon that the boundary between wakefulness and sleep is where many of these experiences occur. In that drowsy twilight state, our brains can produce vivid hallucinations called hypnagogic experiences. The voice calling your name might simply be your brain firing randomly as it powers down for the night. But crikey, knowing the science doesn't make it any less spine-tingling when it happens to you. For those experiencing this phenomenon repeatedly, the irreverent reality is that it can begin to affect every aspect of their lives. Sleep deprivation leads to further hallucinations, creating a vicious cycle. Relationships suffer as loved ones struggle to understand. Work performance declines. The isolation that results can be as damaging as whatever might be causing the voices in the first place. Perhaps the most chilling accounts come from properties with troubled histories. When Emily moved into her heritage-listed cottage in Hobart, she had no idea it had once been a doctor's residence during the 1918 influenza pandemic. The macabre coincidence that she began hearing her name called by what sounded like multiple voices, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, took on a whole new significance when she learned this fact. The question that haunts everyone who experiences this phenomenon is simple: do I answer? Folklore is divided on this point. Some traditions warn never to respond to a disembodied voice, lest you invite something unwelcome into your life. Others suggest that acknowledging the presence might bring peace to both you and whatever might be calling. The meter of making the wrong choice keeps many people frozen in indecision. But what about when the voice in the empty room isn't calling your name anymore? What about when it starts telling you things it shouldn't know, or when it begins to make demands? That's when the experience moves from merely unsettling to truly sobrenatural, and when you might find yourself, like so many before you, driving alone at night down a country road, desperate to escape what follows you. But are you truly alone on that dark stretch of highway? There's something downright terrorizing about driving alone on a country road at night, isn't there? The darkness pressing in from all sides, the headlights cutting a narrow path through the inky blackness, and that nagging feeling that beyond the reach of your high beams lies something watching, waiting. It's a universal fear that taps into our most primal instincts, the dread of being vulnerable in unfamiliar territory. Australian country roads are particularly spooky after dark, no wuckers. Miles of nothing but bush and scrub, the occasional road jumping out to give you a heart attack, and distances so vast you might not see another car for hours. It's in these moments of profound isolation that our minds become hyper-aware, our senses heighten to the point where the boundary between what's real and what's imagined becomes as blurry as the horizon in the distance. Consider poor old Bruce, driving back to Dubbo after a long day's work. It was well past midnight when he spotted something in his headlights, a figure standing dead center in his lane. The irreverent sight made him slam on the brakes, the ute skidding on loose gravel. But when the vehicle came to a stop, there was nothing there. Not a footprint, not a sound, not even the rustling of someone legging it into the bush. Just the empty road stretching before him like a black ribbon. The phenomenon of vanishing hitchhikers and road apparitions isn't new, it's been happening since people first started traveling long distances. These macabre tales exist in every culture, from the ghost of a young woman thumbing a ride home from a dance, only for the driver to discover she died years ago, to indigenous stories of spirit beings that walk the ancient tracks that modern roads now follow. These stories persist because they speak to something universal in the human experience. What's truly fascinating is the consistency in how people describe these encounters. The figure is often motionless, standing directly in the path of the oncoming vehicle. The meter that floods through the driver is immediate and overwhelming, not just the fear of hitting someone, but a deeper, more visceral dread that what they're seeing shouldn't be there. And then, in the blink of an eye, the figure vanishes, leaving the driver questioning their own senses. Road safety experts have fair dinkum explanations for some of these sightings. Fatigue plays havoc with perception, creating microsleeps where the brain fills in gaps with hallucinatory images. The monotony of long drives, combined with the hypnotic effect of headlights on a dark road, creates perfect conditions for the mind to play tricks. Add in the glare of oncoming lights, unusual shadows, or even just an oddly shaped tree, and you've got yourself a recipe for seeing things that aren't there. But what about cases where multiple people witness the same phenomenon? Take the infamous stretch of highway outside of Maryborough, where truckers have been reporting the same figure, a tall, unnaturally thin man standing in the center of the road for decades. These hardened road warriors, not exactly the type to believe in the supernatural, all describe the same eerie details, the figure's stillness, its unnatural height, and the way it seems to fade rather than run when approached. The psychology behind these experiences is complex as our brains are constantly processing massive amounts of visual information, making split-second judgments about what we are seeing. When visibility is poor and we are in a heightened state of alertness or anxiety, our brain errs on the side of caution, sometimes interpreting random patterns of light and shadow as potential threats, like a human figure standing where no human should be. The irreverent reality is that some of these sightings correspond to locations with tragic histories. Many ghostly hitchhiker stories are tied to specific spots where fatal accidents occurred. In the Blue Mountains, locals know to drive carefully around Dead Man's Cove, where numerous sightings of a young man have been reported, always in the same torn clothing, always appearing suddenly, and always vanishing when drivers swerve to avoid him. Records show a motorcyclist died there in the 1970s. The emotional impact of these encounters can be profound. Imagine driving alone at night, your only companion the soft glow of the dashboard and the rhythmic sound of tires on asphalt. Then suddenly, there's someone or something standing in your path. The meter in that moment isn't just startling, it's existential. It challenges our understanding of reality and leaves a psychological imprint that can last for years. What's particularly unsettling is how these encounters often happen to people who consider themselves dead-set rational. Like my cousin Jack, a no-nonsense electrician who'd laugh in your face if you told him ghost stories. Until that night driving back from a job in Bathurst, when he saw an elderly Aboriginal man standing in the road, wearing traditional dress that seemed to glow slightly in the darkness. When Jack stopped, the figure was gone, but the terrorizing feeling of being watched remained. Technology has changed how we document these experiences, but hasn't eliminated them. With dashcams becoming common, you'd think we'd have clear evidence by now. Yet the footage that emerges is always frustratingly ambiguous, strange light anomalies, shadowy shapes that could be anything or nothing. It's as if these phenomena exist in a liminal space that technology can't quite capture, remaining just beyond the reach of definitive proof. Scientists studying the neurological basis of hallucinations suggest that the specific conditions of night driving, the monotonous visual field, the constant low-level vibration, the slight oxygen deprivation that can occur in a closed vehicle create a perfect storm for what they call waking dreams. The macabre visions that result feel completely real to the experiencer, even if they defy logical explanation. There's a cultural dimension to these sightings as well. In parts of Australia with strong Indigenous heritage, these apparitions are often interpreted within the context of traditional beliefs about country and spirit beings. Many Aboriginal cultures speak of guardian spirits that protect specific locations, sometimes by warning travelers of danger. What European Australians might interpret as ghostly hitchhikers, Indigenous Australians might recognize as something far more ancient and purposeful. The accounts that really give you goosebumps are those where the figure seems aware of the observer. Reports describe figures that turn their head to track the approaching vehicle, or worse, begin to move toward the car with unnatural speed. The supernatural implication that these entities are not just visual anomalies but conscious beings interacting with our world is what elevates these stories from curious psychological phenomena to truly bone-chilling encounters. Consider the pattern of these sightings. They almost always occur during transitional periods, twilight, midnight, the pre-dawn hours when the boundary between day and night is blurred. Folklore specialists note that these in-between times have traditionally been associated with thin spots between worlds. The persistent belief that certain hours are witching hours where supernatural encounters are more likely spans cultures and continents. The question that haunts those who've had these experiences is, what if I had stopped? What if, instead of braking or swerving, I had passed through the figure? The meter of what might have happened creates a lasting psychological impact. Some drivers report feeling a sudden chill or electrical sensation when passing through the spot where the figure stood moments before, as if passing through an invisible threshold. For skeptics, the explanation is simple: tired minds, poor visibility, and the power of suggestion create these phantoms. Yet this doesn't account for cases where drivers are alert, conditions are clear, and the witness had no prior knowledge of the location's reputation. When a clear-eyed truck driver with 30 years' experience tells you he saw a figure vanish before his eyes, it's hard to dismiss it as just another tall tale from the outback. The terrorizing truth might be that some of these sightings have saved lives. Countless stories tell of drivers who, after encountering a mysterious figure, slowed down only to discover a real hazard around the next bend: a fallen tree, a washout, or a mob of kangaroos that would have caused a serious accident at higher speeds. Could these apparitions sometimes be serving as warnings rather than simply causing fright? Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the phenomenon is its universality. From the misty roads of Scotland to the dusty highways of the Nullarbor, from ancient Roman roads to modern freeways, the experience of encountering vanishing figures on lonely roads connects us across time and space. The oripient realization that your personal brush with the inexplicable is part of a pattern as old as human travel itself adds another layer to the mystery. Maybe there's something about the liminality of roads themselves, neither here nor there, but paths between places, that makes them hotspots for strange phenomena. Roads cut through landscapes, sometimes disrupting sites of cultural or spiritual significance. What if these figures are manifestations of something older than the roads themselves, something disturbed or displaced by our concrete pathways? This thought leads us to wonder about other places where the veil between worlds might be just as thin, like the homes next door to us that we think we know so well. Have you ever had that eerie feeling about the house next door? The one where the terrorizing silence seems to seep through the shared walls, where the curtains never seem to move, yet sometimes you catch a glimpse of something shifting behind them? There's something deeply unsettling about the idea that what we think we know about our immediate surroundings might be completely wrong, that the ordinary facade might hide something far stranger. In the tight-knit communities of Australian suburbs, where neighbours often become like extended family, the concept of the neighbour who doesn't exist strikes a particularly discordant note. We pride ourselves on our mateship, our looking out for one another. So when a family discovers that the friendly bloke they've been chatting with over the fence for months doesn't actually live there, well, that's enough to make anyone's blood run cold with Meadow. Consider the Cooper family from a quiet street in Geelong. For weeks, they exchanged pleasantries with an elderly man who introduced himself as Arthur, who seemed to be living in the Federation-style home across the road. He knew the neighborhood history, commented on the weather, even collected their mail once when they went away for the weekend. It was only when Mrs. Cooper mentioned Arthur to the real estate agent that the macabre truth emerged: the house had been vacant for over 8 months. What makes these experiences so horrifying is how they challenge our basic understanding of reality. We rely on our senses and social interactions to build our model of the world. When something as fundamental as who lives next door turns out to be false, it creates a ripple effect, making us question what other facts in our lives might actually be elaborate fictions or misunderstandings. Psychologists offer various explanations for these phenomena, from simple misidentification to more complex shared delusions. Sometimes, a family might briefly meet a tradesperson, inspector, or relative of the homeowner and mistakenly assume this person lives there. Over time, confirmation bias fills in the gaps, creating a consistent but entirely fictional neighbor out of scattered, unrelated encounters. But what about cases where multiple, unrelated witnesses describe the same phantom neighbor in identical detail? In a block of flats in Brisbane's West End, 6 different residents reported interactions with a middle-aged woman named Helen who supposedly lived in Unit 7B. They described her distinctive laugh, her collection of exotic plants, even the unusual brooch she always wore. The supernatural twist? Unit 7B had been used exclusively for storage for the past decade. No one named Helen had ever lived there. Historical records sometimes provide chilling context for these encounters. One family in Hobart's Battery Point described months of conversations with a stern, bearded man they believed lived in the colonial cottage opposite theirs. They later discovered the house had been empty since a renovation project was abandoned, but historical photographs revealed their description perfectly matched the original owner who had died there in 1897. The terrorizing implications sent shivers down their spines. These phantom neighbor experiences often follow a recognizable pattern. Initially, the encounters seem perfectly normal, brief, friendly interactions that don't raise any red flags. Over time, observant residents might notice oddities: the neighbor is only ever seen at specific times, never receives visitors, or has uncanny knowledge about past events. When confronted with evidence that their neighbor couldn't possibly exist, witnesses often experience profound psychological distress. Fair dinkum, most of us would be rattled to the core by such a discovery. The Meadow isn't just about the supernatural implications, it's about the fragility of our perception. If we can be so thoroughly convinced of something that isn't real, what else might we be wrong about? This existential uncertainty explains why these stories resonate so deeply, even among skeptics who believe there must be a rational explanation. The cultural traditions around the world have different frameworks for understanding these experiences. In Japanese folklore, the concept of zashikiwarashi describes child spirits that inhabit homes and can appear as ordinary children to neighbors. In Western traditions, the phantom neighbor might be explained as an impressionable ghost, an entity so tied to a location that it continues to go through the motions of everyday life, interacting with the living as if nothing has changed. Modern technology has added new dimensions to these mysteries. Security cameras capture no one entering or leaving the supposedly occupied house. Online searches reveal no digital footprint for the person in question. Yet the oripient certainty of multiple witnesses who've had conversations with this non-existent neighbor remains difficult to dismiss. It creates a cognitive dissonance that can be profoundly unsettling. Consider the case from Fremantle, where a young couple became friends with a retired professor they believed lived in the apartment below theirs. He would bring them homegrown tomatoes, discuss literature, and share stories about his travels. When they finally realized the flat had been vacant for months, they checked their phone, only to find that the selfie they'd taken with him showed them smiling next to empty space. The macabre revelation left them questioning their sanity. These experiences force us to confront uncomfortable possibilities. Are we simply more suggestible than we'd like to believe? Is there something about certain locations that imprints memories or personas that subsequent visitors can somehow perceive? Or is there something more profound happening, a glitch in what we consider reality, or evidence of parallel worlds occasionally overlapping with our own? Community responses to these incidents are telling. When one person reports a phantom neighbor, it's easy to dismiss as confusion or fabrication. But when entire streets or apartment buildings share the same experience, describing identical interactions with someone who couldn't possibly exist, the collective meter reveals how deeply these occurrences disturb our sense of normalcy and security. Some researchers in parapsychology suggest these phantom neighbors might represent a form of residual haunting, not a conscious spirit, but a kind of energy imprint left by a strong personality or traumatic event. Like a video stuck on loop, these imprints may replay certain behaviors and interactions, creating the illusion of a present, interactive neighbor when what witnesses are experiencing is more like an echo from the past. The supernatural implications become even more disturbing when children are involved. In numerous cases, families report that their children were the first to interact with these non-existent neighbors, often describing them in matter-of-fact terms and showing none of the surprise or disbelief that adults later experience. The saying that children are more sensitive to the paranormal takes on new significance in these contexts. What truly makes these cases aterrorizanti is the lingering uncertainty they create. Even when presented with incontrovertible evidence that their neighbor couldn't have been real, witnesses often can't reconcile this fact with their vivid memories of conversations, shared moments, and exchanges that felt entirely authentic. The cognitive dissonance can last for years, fundamentally altering how they trust their own experiences. The phenomenon raises profound questions about community and belonging. We derive significant psychological security from knowing our neighbors, from the familiar faces and routines that make up our immediate environment. When that foundation is revealed to be built on sand, when the friendly wave across the street comes from someone who doesn't exist, it creates a recipient sense of dislocation, of not being able to trust the most basic elements of our daily lives. Perhaps most unsettling are cases where phantom neighbors seem to leave physical evidence behind: the newspaper they borrowed returned to your doorstep, the cup of sugar they asked to borrow now depleted from your pantry, the garden tools they returned slightly muddier than when you lent them. These physical traces challenge purely psychological explanations and suggest something crossing over from whatever realm these entities inhabit into our material world. The meter these experiences generate often leads to practical consequences. Families have been known to move away from homes where they've encountered phantom neighbors, unable to shake the sensation of being deceived by their own senses. Real estate agents report properties that become difficult to sell when word spreads about such occurrences. The economic impact reflects how seriously these encounters affect those who experience them. What connects this phenomenon to broader patterns of the unexplained is how it blurs the line between the living and something else. Unlike traditional ghost stories where the apparition is clearly understood to be supernatural, the phantom neighbor presents as entirely ordinary until the macabre moment of realization. This mundane quality makes the eventual discovery all the more jarring, as it forces us to question not just whether ghosts exist, but whether we can trust our everyday interactions at all. As unsettling as these phantom neighbor cases are, they pale in comparison to the dread of technology bringing the impossible directly into our homes, like receiving communications from those who should no longer be able to reach across the divide. What happens when your phone rings, and the caller ID displays a number that should have been disconnected long ago? There's something profoundly terrorizanti about modern technology connecting us to things that should be impossible. In our hyper-connected world, where everyone is just a tap away, the phone has become our constant companion, a lifeline to friends, family, and the wider world. But what happens when that lifeline reaches somewhere it shouldn't be able to go? When your mobile lights up with a number you recognize as belonging to someone long deceased? It's a phenomenon that's been reported with increasing frequency over the past decade. Ordinary people, going about their daily lives, suddenly confronted with calls or messages from numbers that should have been disconnected, from people who are no longer among the living. The irrepiant juxtaposition of cutting-edge technology with age-old fears about death and what might lie beyond creates a unique kind of terror that feels distinctly modern yet primally ancient. Take the case of Michael from Newcastle, who was having a cuppa on a perfectly normal Tuesday arvo when his phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number displayed belonged to his grandfather, his beloved Pop, who had passed away 3 years earlier. The surge of medo he felt was instantaneous and overwhelming. His finger hovered over the green answer button, trembling. Was it a cruel prank? A technical glitch? Or something far more macabre? The rational explanations are numerous, of course. Phone companies recycle numbers, meaning a stranger could innocently acquire a number previously belonging to someone deceased. Technical glitches in carrier systems can display incorrect caller ID information. Scammers use number spoofing technology to make calls appear to come from different sources. For most of us, these explanations provide comfortable distance from the supernatural implications. Yet these logical explanations often fail to account for the specific circumstances surrounding many of these calls. Recipients report calls coming through exactly on the anniversary of the person's death, or during significant family events the deceased would have attended. Others describe picking up to hear distinctive background noises associated with the departed, a unique laugh in the distance, a favorite song playing faintly, or the sound of a specific environment the person frequented. The psychological impact of these experiences can be devastating. Imagine the emotional whiplash of seeing a beloved parent's number flash on your screen years after their funeral. The initial shock, the surge of impossible hope, the crushing reminder of loss, and then the creeping dread as you wonder what this communication could possibly mean. It's enough to leave even the most grounded individual profoundly shaken. What makes these phenomena particularly terrorizing is how they breach the technological barriers we've constructed between the world of the living and whatever might exist beyond. Throughout human history, communication with the dead required special circumstances, seances, mediums, sacred sites, or specific rituals. Now, apparently, all it takes is a mobile phone. The democratization of the supernatural through everyday technology feels like a fundamental rule has been broken. Telecommunications experts offer technical explanations for some cases. Ghost calls can occur when fragments of data get stuck in carrier systems and are suddenly released, causing phones to ring with calls that were actually attempted days, weeks, or even months earlier. In rural Australia, where mobile reception can be as reliable as a politician's promise, signals can bounce between towers in unusual ways, creating all sorts of anomalies in the system. But what about the content of these communications? Those brave or desperate enough to answer these calls report a range of experiences, from complete silence to strange static to distorted voices that somehow remain recognizable. One woman in Adelaide described answering a call from her deceased sister's number only to hear what sounded like her sister's voice repeatedly saying "I'm stuck" before the connection abruptly terminated. The macabre experience left her sleepless for weeks. Cultural beliefs significantly influence how people interpret these events. In many Indigenous Australian traditions, communication from ancestors is viewed as a natural part of existence rather than something to fear. In other cultural contexts, these calls might be interpreted as unfinished business, souls trapped between worlds, or warnings about future events. The framework we apply colors the experience with either medo or comfort. The timing of these calls often adds another layer of mystery. They frequently occur during transitional periods, midnight, dawn, significant anniversaries, or moments of personal crisis for the recipient. This pattern aligns with traditional beliefs about when the veil between worlds is thinnest, suggesting that whatever forces enable these communications might be strongest during certain temporal windows. Most disturbing are cases involving multiple witnesses. When a phone rings in a room full of people, all of whom can see the impossible caller ID, the experience moves from subjective to shared reality. In a pub in Ballarat, a group of friends were having a memorial drink for their mate who had died in an accident 6 months earlier when one of their phones rang, displaying the deceased's number. The supernatural coincidence reduced the hardened group of blokes to stunned silence. Technology has evolved, but our primal fears remain unchanged. Perhaps that's why these stories resonate so deeply. They represent the collision of our ancient dread of death with our modern technological landscape. The smartphone, that most familiar of objects, becomes a portal to something unknown, challenging our carefully constructed boundaries between the possible and impossible, between presence and absence. Some researchers in digital afterlife studies suggest these experiences might increase as our digital footprints grow more extensive. With automated systems, scheduled emails, and AI that can mimic writing styles or even voices, the irreparable possibility exists that technology might increasingly blur the line between communications from the living and the dead. Future generations might regularly encounter digital ghosts of those who've passed, raising profound questions about grief, memory, and closure. The patterns in these accounts reveal something important about human psychology. Those who receive these impossible calls often report being in the midst of difficult decisions, unresolved grief, or significant life transitions. The calls frequently seem to contain information or emotional content directly relevant to these struggles. This suggests our minds might be particularly receptive to anomalous experiences during periods of psychological vulnerability. What's fair dinkum terrifying is when these communications contain information the caller couldn't possibly know through normal means. In one documented case from Brisbane, a woman received a text from her deceased husband's number that referenced a conversation she had had just hours earlier with a new romantic interest, something no living person had been privy to. The meter such specific knowledge inspires cuts deeper than any generic ghostly encounter. The question that haunts recipients of these calls is whether they should respond. Folklore around communicating with the dead is filled with warnings about opening doors that cannot be easily closed. Yet the natural human impulse when seeing a loved one's number is to answer, to respond to a text, to grasp at that impossible connection. This tension creates profound psychological conflict that many describe as the most distressing aspect of the experience. For skeptics, these phenomena represent a perfect storm of technological glitches, psychological projection, and confirmation bias. Yet even hardcore disbelievers often become quiet when confronted with cases where multiple phones in different locations receive the same impossible call simultaneously, or when communications contain verifiable information that couldn't have been obtained through normal channels. The macabre implications force a reckoning with our understanding of reality. Perhaps what makes these experiences truly terrorizing is not the suggestion that consciousness might survive death. Many find that notion comforting rather than frightening. Rather, it's the implication that the boundaries we've constructed between life and death, between presence and absence, might be far more permeable than we've allowed ourselves to believe. If the dead can call us, what else might cross that threshold? The advent of artificial intelligence has added yet another layer to these mysteries. Modern AI systems can analyze vast amounts of data from a person's digital footprint to create increasingly convincing simulations of how they might communicate. The irreparable possibility that future generations might be unable to distinguish between genuine paranormal contact and sophisticated digital mimicry raises profound questions about authenticity and closure in the grieving process. For some recipients, these calls eventually take on a pattern that feels almost like a relationship continuing beyond death. Initial terror gives way to anticipation, then to a strange comfort in these impossible connections. One elderly man in Tasmania described receiving calls from his deceased wife's number every Sunday afternoon, the traditional time for weekly planning, for over a year after her passing. Though he never heard her voice, the predictable timing gave him supernatural comfort rather than fear. Yet for every story of comfort, there are others where the communications take a darker turn. Recipients report calls escalating in frequency, occurring at increasingly disruptive hours, or containing increasingly desperate or threatening messages. The meter such escalations create often leads people to change their numbers, replace their phones, or even move homes in an attempt to sever the unwanted connection that technology seems to have enabled. What connects these experiences to wider patterns of unexplained phenomena is how they force us to question fundamental assumptions about reality. If our most reliable, scientifically created technologies can suddenly bridge what should be an unbridgeable gap, what other aspects of our world might not operate according to the rules we think govern them? This question becomes particularly pressing when people find themselves in remote, isolated places, far from the technological infrastructure of modern life, like deep in the Australian bush, where strange voices on the wind might be more than just the rustling of leaves. There's something primal about sitting around a campfire in the Australian bush, the crackling flames pushing back the darkness, the vast canopy of stars overhead, and the terrorizing awareness of just how isolated you truly are. It's in these moments, when we've stepped away from the comfort and security of our everyday lives, that our senses become heightened, and sometimes, we hear things that shouldn't be there. The phenomenon of mysterious voices or whispers at remote campsites has been reported by bushwalkers, campers, and adventurers across the continent. From the dense rainforests of Queensland to the arid expanses of the Nullarbor, people describe hearing hushed conversations, distant singing, or their names being called when there couldn't possibly be anyone else for miles. The European consistency of these accounts across different terrains and cultures suggests something more complex than mere imagination. Consider the experience of the Jensen family during their camping trip in the Grampians National Park. They'd set up their site well away from the designated camping areas, seeking solitude and a true wilderness experience. On their second night, as they sat around the fire roasting marshmallows, all 5 family members simultaneously heard what sounded like a group of people whispering just beyond the circle of light. The macabre part? The whispers seemed to be discussing the family themselves, commenting on their actions in real time. Acoustic experts offer some scientific explanations for these phenomena. Sound can travel in unusual ways in natural environments, bouncing off rock faces, carried by thermal air currents, or channeled through natural formations in ways that distort both distance and direction. What sounds like nearby whispers might actually be fragments of conversations from hikers kilometers away, transformed by the landscape into something eerily close and unintelligible. But these rational explanations often fail to account for the specific nature of what people report hearing. Many describe the voices calling their names, not nicknames or common terms that might be misheard from random sounds, but full, proper names that couldn't be mistaken. Others report hearing snippets of conversation that directly respond to something said moments before around the campfire. The medo such experiences inspire comes precisely from this sense of being observed by unseen presences. The psychological dimension can't be ignored. When we step into the wilderness, we are entering an environment that triggers ancient survival instincts. Our brains become hypervigilant, constantly scanning for potential threats. This state of alertness can lead to pareidolia, the tendency to find meaningful patterns in random stimuli. Just as we might see faces in rock formations, our brains might transform the rustling of leaves or animal calls into something that sounds like human speech. Yet this explanation struggles to account for cases where entire groups hear exactly the same thing simultaneously. At a youth camping expedition near Katoomba, 12 teenagers and their 3 adult supervisors all reported hearing a woman's voice singing a lullaby that none of them recognized, drifting through their campsite at precisely 3:17 a.m. The sobrenatural precision of the timing and the unanimous agreement about what they'd heard makes simple psychological explanation seem insufficient. The cultural and historical context often adds another layer to these experiences. Many of Australia's most popular camping areas are located on or near sites of significance to Indigenous Australians, places with complex histories and spiritual importance that stretches back tens of thousands of years. The terrorizing possibility that modern campers might be encountering echoes of this ancient connection to country cannot be easily dismissed, especially when the whispers sometimes incorporate words from languages the hearers don't speak. For backpackers from overseas, these experiences can be particularly unsettling. Unfamiliar with the Australian bush and its normal sounds, they lack the framework to distinguish between ordinary wildlife noises and something truly anomalous. A German tourist camping in Kakadu described hearing what sounded like a group of children laughing and playing just outside her tent at midnight, her experience made more radiant by the park ranger's confirmation that no other campers were within several kilometers of her site. Weather conditions seem to play a significant role in these occurrences. Many reports cluster around specific atmospheric conditions: still, humid nights, the approach of electrical storms, or the heavy silence that follows rain. Some scientists speculate that certain environmental factors might create conditions where sound waves from the past could somehow be captured and replayed, a natural recording and playback mechanism that might explain some of these acoustic anomalies. The most macabre accounts involve whispers that seem to know things they shouldn't. A group of experienced bushwalkers in Tasmania described setting up camp after a difficult day's hike, only to hear whispers discussing intimate details of conversations they'd had earlier that day when they were completely alone on the trail. The voices seemed to be evaluating them, commenting on their decisions and speculating about their futures in ways that left them paralyzed with meter. How we interpret these experiences is heavily influenced by our belief systems and cultural backgrounds. Indigenous rangers often have different perspectives on these phenomena compared to Western scientists or urban campers. What one person experiences as a terrifying encounter with the unknown, another might recognize as a normal aspect of a landscape alive with ancestral presence. The framework we bring determines whether we feel terror or awe. The timing of these whispers often follows patterns that transcend individual experiences. Many occur during the transitional periods of dawn and dusk, or at specific hours of the night that have traditional associations with supernatural activity. This consistency across unrelated accounts from different locations suggests either a shared psychological trigger or something more mysterious tied to the rhythm of the natural world itself. Modern technology has changed how we document these experiences. Where once they might have been dismissed as campfire tales or travelers' exaggerations, now people capture audio recordings that reveal strange vocal phenomena that weren't audible to the human ear at the time. The Euripient analysis of these recordings often reveals words or phrases that seem deliberate rather than random, raising questions about what forms of communication might exist beyond our normal perception. The psychological aftermath of these encounters can be significant. Many people report developing a newfound respect or fear of remote areas after hearing inexplicable whispers. Some never camp again, while others become fascinated by the experience and seek out similar locations hoping for a recurrence. The meter these experiences inspire isn't always negative. If for some, it creates a profound sense of connection to something larger than themselves. Researchers studying these phenomena have noted clusters of reports around specific locations, whisper spots where multiple, unrelated parties report similar experiences over time. One such location in the Blue Mountains has generated consistent reports of whispering voices for over a century, with descriptions remaining remarkably consistent despite changes in the surrounding environment and the cultural background of visitors. Such supernatural consistency challenges purely psychological explanations. Perhaps most unsettling are cases where the whispers seem to precede or predict events that later come to pass. A family camping near Uluru described hearing voices discussing a coming storm when weather forecasts predicted clear skies. They decided to break camp early based on these whispers, only to narrowly avoid a flash flood that swept through their original campsite hours later. Such accounts suggest a relationship between these phenomena and time that defies conventional understanding. The terrorizing impact of these experiences is often heightened by their contrast with the rational, technological world we normally inhabit. When your smartphone has no signal, your GPS can't get a lock, and you truly disconnected from the modern world, encounters with the inexplicable take on a different quality. The wilderness strips away our usual defenses against the unknown, leaving us vulnerable to experiences we might otherwise filter out. The question of whether to acknowledge or respond to these whispers divides even experienced outdoors people. Some indigenous traditions hold that acknowledging the voices, introducing yourself to country and explaining your presence respectfully, can transform a potentially frightening experience into a protective one. Others warn that responding can intensify the phenomena or signal a willingness to engage that might be best avoided, particularly when the whispers seem macabre or threatening. What connects these experiences to broader patterns of the unexplained is their liminality. They occur in boundary spaces, transitions between civilization and wilderness, between wakefulness and sleep, between the known and unknown. In these threshold spaces, our normal categories and explanations become less rigid, opening possibilities for experiences that don't fit neatly into our everyday understanding of reality. But what if these whispers aren't coming from outside at all? What if something within our homes, something seemingly innocent and ordinary, could harbor intentions and abilities far beyond what we'd care to imagine? The medo of the unknown in wild places is one thing, but the fear of the familiar suddenly revealed as something else entirely is perhaps the most disturbing frontier of all. There's something inherently unsettling about dolls, isn't there? Those glassy eyes that seem to follow you around the room, the frozen smiles that never quite reach their eyes, the uncanny valley between human and object. It's no wonder they feature so prominently in horror films and urban legends. But what happens when the terrorizing possibility that they might actually move becomes reality? When a child's insistence that my doll moves when no one's looking is validated by cold, hard video evidence? Our rational minds immediately search for explanations, drafts from air conditioning, vibrations from passing traffic, or perhaps a practical joke from an older sibling. Yet these comfortable rationalizations crumble when confronted with footage of a porcelain doll rotating a full 180 degrees on a perfectly still shelf, or a rag doll's arm slowly raising to point toward a doorway, all captured on security cameras with timestamps and multiple angles that rule out tampering or tricks. Take the case that shocked a quiet Brisbane suburb last year. 4-year-old Lily had been insisting for weeks that her vintage Matryoshka doll would change positions while she slept. Her parents, concerned about her growing medo of the toy but assuming it was just childish imagination, set up a nanny cam to prove the doll stayed put. What they captured instead was the macabre side of the wooden doll rotating in place at 3:14 a.m., its painted face turning slowly until it faced directly at the sleeping child. Child psychologists offer reassuring explanations for children's beliefs that their toys move. Magical thinking is a normal developmental stage where children attribute life and intention to inanimate objects. Combined with limited understanding of object permanence and spatial memory, it's natural for children to believe toys have moved when they simply don't remember placing them in their current position. But this doesn't explain cases documented by adults with no prior belief in such phenomena. What makes these incidents particularly horrifying is how they challenge our fundamental understanding of the physical world. Objects don't move without a force acting upon them, that's basic physics. When a doll climbs 3 steps without any visible means of locomotion, as security footage from a historic bed and breakfast in Port Arthur clearly showed, we are forced to consider explanations that lie outside our comfortable scientific paradigms. There's a rich tradition of moving or possessed dolls across cultures. From Robert the doll in Key West to Japan's Okiku doll that supposedly grows human hair, these stories persist because they touch something primal in our collective psyche. The supernatural implication that consciousness or intention might exist within seemingly inanimate objects disrupts our entire categorization of the world into living and non-living things. The psychological impact of witnessing such phenomena firsthand can be profound. Adults who've seen dolls move often report a fundamental shift in their worldview, a kind of existential medo that extends far beyond the initial shock. If this solid boundary between animate and inanimate can be breached, what other aspects of reality might not be as fixed or reliable as we've always believed? Skeptical investigators point to sophisticated hoaxes as explanations for many documented cases. In the age of viral videos, there's significant incentive to create convincing footage of paranormal phenomena. Hidden threads, magnets, radio-controlled mechanisms, or clever editing can create illusions that appear genuine even to careful observers. Yet this explanation struggles with cases investigated by multiple independent experts who find no evidence of tampering. The most terrorizing cases involve patterns of movement that suggest purpose or intelligence. A family in Adelaide documented their daughter's porcelain doll repeatedly returning to a specific window overlooking their garden, even when locked in cupboards or placed in different rooms. Security footage showed the doll making incremental movements over several nights, always ending in the same position facing outward as if watching for something or someone. Historical context often adds another layer to these cases. Antique dolls, particularly those with unknown provenance or those that have survived tragic circumstances, feature prominently in accounts of unexplained movement. A Victorian-era doll rescued from a house fire in Ballarat that claimed the lives of 2 children has been documented moving its singed arms in patterns that experts in historical sign language identified as spelling out the same phrase repeatedly, "a help find home." The macabre reality is that some dolls seem to become focal points for unusual activity beyond just movement. Families report electronic disturbances, unexplained sounds, or other objects being displaced in proximity to the doll. In extreme cases, they describe pets refusing to enter rooms where the doll is kept, or family members experiencing nightmares featuring the doll in positions it's later found to have assumed. These clustering effects suggest something more complex than simple mechanical anomalies. Cultural attitudes toward dolls vary widely and influence how these phenomena are interpreted. In some traditions, dolls are specifically created to house spirits or entities, serving as vessels or anchors for non-physical beings. The Middle-Western observers feel when confronted with moving dolls might be rooted in cultural assumptions that objects and consciousness should remain firmly separated, assumptions not shared by all societies throughout history. The question of agency lies at the heart of what makes these cases so disturbing. Random movement caused by environmental factors is one thing. A doll that appears to react to conversations, respond to commands, or interact with its environment in purposeful ways suggests a form of consciousness that shouldn't exist within inanimate objects. This hint of impossible intelligence amplifies the fear response far beyond what random movement would trigger. Modern technology has transformed how these phenomena are documented and investigated. Where once we had only eyewitness accounts, now high-definition security cameras, motion sensors, thermal imaging, and environmental monitoring equipment create detailed records of these events. The European precision of this documentation has eliminated many potential natural explanations while revealing patterns that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. Perhaps most unsettling are cases involving children too young to fabricate elaborate hoaxes or understand the cultural significance of moving dolls. Toddlers who matter-of-factly report conversations with dolls that later move on camera, or infants who consistently react with fear to specific dolls that are later documented moving, challenge our assumptions about suggestion or imagination being the driving forces behind these accounts. The historical record contains numerous examples of moving dolls being associated with poltergeist phenomena, clusters of unexplained physical effects often centered around adolescents or preteens. The supernatural connection between puberty's psychological and physiological changes and these manifestations suggests complex relationships between human development, consciousness, and the physical world that mainstream science has yet to fully explore. What makes these cases particularly compelling is their consistency across time and cultures. Long before viral videos or horror films established cultural expectations about how haunted dolls should behave, similar patterns of movement were being documented in environments as diverse as Victorian England, feudal Japan, and colonial Australia. The heterogeneity similarity of these accounts despite their cultural isolation from each other suggests either a universal psychological projection or a genuine phenomenon independent of cultural framing. For families experiencing these events, the practical questions can be as disturbing as the philosophical ones. What do you do with a doll that moves on its own? Destroying it might seem the obvious solution, but folklore and personal accounts suggest this sometimes escalates rather than resolves the activity. Many families report increased disturbances after attempting to discard moving dolls, only to have the dolls inexplicably return or the phenomena transfer to other objects. The ethical dimensions become particularly complex when children are involved. When a child insists their doll moves and video evidence supports their claim, parents face difficult decisions about whether to remove a potentially comforting toy, validate experiences others might dismiss as impossible, or seek help from practitioners operating outside mainstream science. The meter of making the wrong choice can be paralyzing. Perhaps what connects these experiences most deeply to our primal fears is how they subvert the ordinary and familiar. Dolls occupy intimate spaces in our homes, children's bedrooms, family living areas, display cabinets filled with heirlooms and memories. When these familiar objects behave in impossible ways, they transform safe spaces into sites of uncertainty and potential threat. The boundary between comfort and macabre terror becomes as fluid as the doll's unexpected movements. In the final analysis, the phenomenon of moving dolls forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about consciousness, intention, and the nature of reality itself. Whether these movements result from subtle environmental factors we don't yet understand, manifestations of unconscious psychokinetic abilities, or evidence of non-physical entities interacting with our world, they challenge our neat categorizations and comfortable assumptions about how reality operates. And perhaps that challenge, that arrepient reminder of how little we truly know about the universe we inhabit, is the most disturbing aspect of all.